This podcast is brought to you by absolutely no one. The Bold and the Beautiful podcast with Dave Vella. Who the hell is Dave Vella?
Hello beautiful people, thanks for joining me. I hope you got to listen to the last episode about yoni mapping. If you don't know what that's all about, you should really have a listen. It was all about sex, relationships, intimacy. I said sex, that's it. If you haven't had a listen, go back and have a little listen to the chat I had with Mariam Noor. It was great, I absolutely loved it. But for this one, we're going on a totally different tact. This one is all about mindset, stress, PTSD, resilience, and emotional intelligence. My guest today is a former Australian Special Forces Commando, an elite soldier who joined the army straight out of school. He's done tours of Iraq, Afghanistan. He's worked in private security for the likes of the late great Steve Irwin and also private security over in the Middle East. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the last time I got to wrestle him, he was about 98 kilos of solid toughness. Not fun with him knee riding you while trying to choke you into submission. But since then, he's been running marathons. Now, this is from a guy that went through the army hating running. Now you can imagine, you've seen it on the movies. They all do that running in the armies, in the Navy, any special forces where they're wearing the big backpacks, running through the rain, you name it. He hated it. He said he was always coming in last, but his goal was just to get through it. Well, since then, he's embraced the art of running. He's leaned down to a nice 83 kilos and he's ready to tackle his first ultra marathon. Crazy, or is it? He says it's all about mindset, mental toughness, being prepared. Now he's married, he's a dad to 2 kids, and he's taking what he's learned and he's now teaching it to others. So if you want to improve your physical, your mental, your emotional toughness, you can get in contact with him via his Operator Edge website, and I'll have all those details in the episode notes. Well, let's get into the conversation, shall we? Please welcome my beautiful guest, Rhys Dowden. You joined the army at 18.
Yeah.
What made you think about the army?
Always going to join the army.
Really?
Yeah, I did army cadets when I was a kid. So
Okay.
I joined the army cadets when I was 12.
Yeah.
And
It was just never an option. Never an option to do anything else.
no, not really. And I think for a lot of, I think a lot of young boys in particular think about, that kind of role, like military or police or something like that. Even if it's a fleeting moment, I think a lot of kids, when you play those certain games of you play, you play with guns and somebody's a bad guy, somebody's a good guy. Yeah. And I think a lot of kids envisage or have thoughts about joining the army, or like I said, join the police, or some kind of role like emergency services, something like that. And so my dad was a police officer as well. He was a copper for 40 years in Queensland. So
You grew up in Queensland?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
So Sunshine Coast mainly, from the end of primary school and then high school. But before that I was born in Gladstone, and then up near Mossman we spent 4 years, which is near Cairns.
Yeah.
So up there, and then finish on the Sunshine Coast. But so I was always, I knew enough about police to know that I didn't want to do that, because Dad was sort of, I guess, took me out of it. Not so much talk me out of it, but you certainly got the inside goss of the police officers. But with what I do now, talking to the coppers who are in the police tactical groups, like the special operations for police, that's something I definitely would have.
Really?
I think I would have enjoyed, and I would have gone down that path. But yeah, for me, I was always going to go that way. And I remember Tony. It was interesting talking about. I was just saying that a lot of kids probably have that thought of doing that kind of sort of similar role when they're a kid. I remember talking with Tony Abbott. He gave a speech.
Tony Abbott
when we were in Afghan.
The bike riding Tony Abbott.
Yep, the Iron Man finisher.
Yeah.
He came over when we were in Afghan. He talked to us, and I remember it was really interesting because he'd been up for days. He was wrecked. He was in massive sleep deprivation. I remember he was drinking coffee and all his lips were stained with because he had dry mouth.
Yeah.
Because he was in this new environment and he hadn't slept and he was probably a little bit stressed. And yeah, it was interesting. But he was talking about, he always thought about that as well. And he'd read a quote somewhere where I think it was a pretty old quote by someone a long time ago. It was basically saying that when often, particularly men, will get to a certain age where they if they haven't ever done something like that, either being in the police or the military or emergency services, they regret it somewhat. And I mean, I'm not sure how true that is, but I talk to a lot of people that seem to have these moments in their life or these thoughts of going down that pathway. And I think if you have other people around you, hanging around like-minded people type thing, and I was around doing army cadets and around those people, and that was always going to be the way.
Well, it's a very much a boy thing, isn't it? A man thing. It's a testosterone thing. Sort of, you're either doing that, or maybe if you don't do that, you've headed into say football or some sort of contact sport, martial arts. I went into the martial arts. You went into the martial arts. So maybe it's just a boy thing that we do.
Yeah, it's a boy thing, and it's a bonding thing. Yeah, like any one of those things. Like my brother played football, professional league. Yep. He played in England for the Super League. Played for Wales because he's my half brother, so his dad was Welsh, so he got to play for Wales in the World Cup.
Oh wow!
Played in Newcastle for 97-98 when they won the title. He was mainly reserve grade player, but he played his fair share of first grade, and. The stories that he tells me and I guess the love for the game, but more really the bond and the love of being around the boys and being in that environment. It's the same as with the army. Yeah. It's the same as with the police. It's the same as with these, all these other or potential organisations that you can be in when you're around the guys all the time.
It encourages though that real boy behaviour though, doesn't it? And sometimes, and I was reading something when I was on your website about. I think a blog that you did about 8 things you learnt in the Special Forces. And one of them was about humour, how you got to have humour. Yeah. And the article was talking about how sometimes you guys would use humour just to either pass the time, but sometimes just to really take your mind off the stuff that you're going into. Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's really quite interesting how boys use humour to divert their attention away from shit that's really happening.
Yeah. It's almost a way to get through it. Yeah. And then after the fact, when you've gone through a shitty moment, I guess your brain is quite good at forgetting the really shit times, and you cherry pick those really funny times, those really good times. Otherwise, you'd never go back.
Yeah, true.
And it's almost my wife's a lactation consultant and a midwife and sexual health. She got a master's in sexual health, and we had our second child at home and everything, and she talks about it, and I can see from that perspective of having a baby, right, that if you only thought or you only remembered the horrible shit time, the painful time that is going through, but you wouldn't have another one. Nah. And she says it, you wouldn't have another one. And she after the first one, and I remember distinctly being in there when our second one came out, and I mean, I was delivering it because our midwife was in Lismore.
Wow. So you delivered the whole baby?
The head was coming out, and the chick walked in, and I'm high-fiving her, swapping out. So I'm glad she came in because I was sweating bullets.
No way.
And then I ended up catching the baby. But you see how they're going through that. That. It's not so much trauma, but it's a really hard thing.
It is a trauma. Yeah, it's a physical trauma.
It's a really painful event that they're going through. And 5 minutes later, she's like, "Oh, I could do that again." I'm thinking, "I remember I just saw you 10 minutes ago." Yeah. But if your brain only focused on that, you would never do that again. So I think with guys and being in the not so much with guys, but being in the shitty situations overseas. I mean, I remember sitting there, and when it was. I think the hottest day we got that I measured on my Kestrel, which is a little measuring device you use when you're in snipers to measure the wind, to measure the barometric pressure, and measure the temperature, that kind of thing, and you use it towards your calculations for firing your weapon. And it was 56 degrees one day. Wow. And you're sitting there in the heat and the sun's on you. That's not enjoyable, mate. I don't give a fuck who you are. Yeah. That's not enjoyable.
No, that's not fun.
But just so, and then somebody will and you're all having a shit time, you're all miserable, and you still got to do, obviously do your job. And then somebody will come out with some stupid comment that it's just ridiculous in that moment. And that just sort of breaks the monotony and breaks the pain of what you're going through. And it's really funny, and that's what gets you through. And when you have, I always think that in a team, it doesn't matter what team I'm talking about, but I'll relate it back to being in a special operations environment and a really shit environment overseas. Not all the time, but sometimes, especially when you talk about elements like weather and dealing with the enemy and things like that, and sleep deprivation, and you're eating shitty food out of the ration backs. It's not. It's it's a great time, but it's not a great time. You need to have that one or two guys that are funny. But what was good with our team, and particularly in that special operations environment, a lot of guys are like that. A lot of guys are funny, and they're funny at different. Obviously, they have different, I guess, personality traits, and the way they bring out that humour. Some guys are just overtly funny all the time, which is good, and some guys just bring it out every so often, like black humour. And it just
deadpan face.
And the medical people, emergency services, doctors, nurses, ER, people working ER, they talk about having that black humour as well, like being around that death and destruction all the time. That it's an outlet and a way to cope. Like if you always took it so seriously, you'd never go back for another shift.
Yeah, and you went back for a few shifts too, didn't you? You did. How many times did you go back to Afghanistan and Iraq?
I went to Afghanistan twice, but I went to Iraq 3 times. I did private security in Iraq, which was a whole different sort of environment.
What did you enjoy more, the private security or the actual being in the army?
As for doing the job, being in the army, but doing it with the army, doing it with 2 Commando was definitely better. Yep. Much harder to do it because in 2 Commando we were, you're like the tip of the spear as they call it, or you're the one doing the tough jobs because you're trained for it.
So when you say tough jobs, what are the tough jobs?
So you're going and engaging with the enemy all the time.
Yeah.
Like pretty much every mission you go on, you'll 95% of the time we got in contact with the enemy.
So there's fire?
Yeah, there's fire, what they call, TIC, which stands for Troops in Contact. Yep. So we would get in TIC, most of the time, the majority of the time we went out. Whereas in Iraq, I was doing the private security, so it wasn't, it wasn't, I guess, relatively, it wasn't as dangerous. Yeah.
Is that private security for companies, for individuals?
You were working basically for the American government, or the Department of Defence over there. We had Department of Defence ID tags and all that kind of stuff, which I don't think they do now. But you're basically working for the government, like for the Australian government or for the US government. Yeah. So you're protecting either protecting equipment or protecting people or protecting bases. Like we were protecting American troop bases. Yeah, where American troops were. They would contract.
That seems weird.
I know it does.
Weird.
It seems very weird, especially if you haven't sort of been in there. And I guess it was weird for me the first time. But with the private security, and a lot of people don't realise, there was just as many private security. Well, probably not just as many, but almost as many private security that were killed in Iraq or have been killed in Iraq than the military.
You don't hear about that.
But you don't hear about that because you don't need to hear about it. Because people, when you go under the military banner, it's a huge deal, right? If a soldier gets killed. But if you go under a private security banner, that's not really reported. I mean, you heard about Australians get killed and it will be in the paper and everything, but it's not, they're not going under the government banner. They're going under their own free will. So it's just not as big as a talking point or as big as a tragedy it would be as a soldier who's signed up to serve the country and then are at the beck and call of the government.
Did you experience much death over there as far as people that you knew in your command or in your...
With the army?
Yeah.
We had. I mean, 2 Commandos got the highest death rate and the highest injury rate in the entire Australian Defence Force. So there was
just so people understand, 2 Commando is the name of the regiment. Your regiment, yeah.
So that's the unit that I was a part of. Yeah. Yeah. So we had the highest, I guess, guys that were killed in action and wounded over there. And I think we have more citations and more medals and bravery awards than the rest and anyone else as well.
Yeah, wow.
So it was, it's. I mean, I guess that's your job. You put in, you're trained up. You're professional soldiers. You're at the elite level, so you can therefore do those jobs that nobody else can do. So you're put in those situations where you're trying to execute the will of the government and whatever missions you have laid out, depending on what your command tell you. And so for SF, that's really going out and finding the enemy and engaging the enemy. And so you're put in those dangerous situations, and as a result of that, people get killed and people get injured, and 2 Commando bore the brunt of that.
Yeah, wow.
Because we're a bigger SF unit. Like if you talk about...
SF, by the way, is Special Forces?
Special Forces,
Yep.
yeah. If you talk, the 2 Special Forces units in Australia are really 2 Commando and the Special SS Regiment in Perth, and we're just a little bit bigger unit. So I guess we would put in those areas, have a larger force put in the bad areas. So just by doing that, by default, we're in harm's way a little bit more. Whereas I guess the SAS would do a little bit more targeted operations and a small force. So a little bit different roles. Okay, so yeah, that's why I think 2 Commando bore the brunt of the killed in action overseas.
Yeah, wow. So how does that make you feel when you see or you experience or you know that someone in your group, in your bunch of guys, has just lost their lives? What does it do to you? Yeah,
it was. It's interesting because I think you're definitely much more affected by guys that the guys that are in your platoon, in your team that have been killed. With me personally, when I was on the trips, we didn't have anyone in my team that was killed. We had guys that were blown up and injured. Damien Tomlinson, who's written a book, another commander's written a book called Without Warning. He got blown up and lost his legs. Like that was in the sister platoon, and we were there. Like our platoon was right there when that happened. And then Brett Till was an engineer that got blown up a couple of days before. He was killed. But for me personally, when I was on the ground, I didn't have anyone in my team or in my platoon that were killed. But back in Australia, other guys I knew really well that I went through selection with for commandos and the reinforcement cycle, which is the training cycle to become a commando. You learn all your skills. I had a couple of good mates that were killed who ended up going to other companies, so they did rotations over to Afghan at different times, and I had a couple of really good mates, Tim Applin and Merv McDonald, that were killed, and that hit much harder than I guess people outside of my direct team. Yeah.
When that happens, do you guys undergo some sort of therapy afterwards?
No, well, that's a really interesting point, and I've been listening to. There's a very intelligent colonel. His name is Colonel Dave Grossman. He's a psychologist, and he's written a number of books. One's called On Killing and one's called On Combat. And
where's he based?
He's based in the States.
Yep.
But his website's called Killology. And he basically talks about everything about the physiological and psychological effects of killing and being in combat, and how we can prime guys to be okay during it and afterwards. He says forearmed is forewarned.
So is that part of your training? Like when you go through training to be the commando and learning all this sort of stuff, is there training on the reality of what's going to happen and how you're going to deal with it and what you need?
There's more now. Yeah, there's more now. There wasn't in our training. It was really. It is the realistic type training, scenario training is there, all right? You use a lot of mainly live rounds. You do opposed training with simunition rounds. You have setups that look exactly like you're going to operate overseas, and you train. And so when it comes to the time when you do it, like pulling the trigger, for example, is a no-brainer. You don't even think about that. It's like, and this is what this Colonel Grossman talks about. In earlier wars, people would not fire.
Yeah.
People would get into, the classic examples back in the American Civil War, where people having the muskets they would fire, they wouldn't even fire, they would just keep reloading and pretend to fire because they didn't want to kill the enemy.
Yeah, wow.
And it was only like 10% that maybe wanted to kill the enemy. And each war it would increase. Up to Vietnam, it was his stats, not my stats. So his stats were saying it was sort of 65% that wanted to actually kill the enemy, would fire their weapon to try and kill the enemy.
Wow.
Now it's almost 100%.
Yeah, if you're going
95
in, you're going
100%.
in.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because? Is that because when those wars were going around, a lot of people got conscripted and taken into the war? You had to go into the war. You were sort of either felt like you had to be in part of the war, or you were told you had to be part of the war, and therefore, if you weren't really into it, you're probably not going to commit to firing, eh?
Oh, I think that's definitely a valid point. But also the training.
Yeah.
The training that we have now compared to back then is chalk and cheese, really. I mean, you try and send someone that's worked the farm their whole life in central Queensland in World War I and go throw them on the banks of Gallipoli and go, go for it. Talk about sensory overload.
Yeah.
And this is why the realistic training is so important now, because of that almost desensitization to what you're going to go through. So it's being able to handle that stress, it's understanding what you're going to go through, and then being prepared for that. And then you couple that with your actual training, your actual skill sets, and trusting the guys in your team, and then all the technology that you use as well. It all combines to make especially like just any soldier, but in particular the elite soldier who is in that special operations outfit, much more able to prosecute their mission and do it really well, and then be okay after the fact. There's a lot of, like, if you talk, and I have people say to me, I'll talk to somebody and if they know my background, or they've worked it out through friends of friends or whatever, they might say to me, "Oh, you seem okay," and I'm like, "Well, I am okay."
Yeah.
And in fact, the majority of people, and people will probably try and cut me down for this, but the facts are the facts. The majority of people that go to war are okay.
Okay.
They are, and Lieutenant Colonel Grossman talks about this, that the people that they sometimes perpetuate statistics for their own gain, and that's not just in war. That's
it. Yes.
Yeah. And so it depends on how you read them, but really, in all the studies that they've done, it's about 5 to 10% of people that are have severe case of post-traumatic stress.
And that's probably similar if you took the wider community anyway.
Yeah. Anyone that goes through trauma.
Through trauma, yeah.
Exactly right. And in fact, people that go, that have a traumatic experience in their normal life who haven't been trained to deal with that and aren't expecting that, that's when you're probably more likely going to have an effect. Whereas soldiers are trained for that. And what I'm saying, particularly the special operations environment, the training in that environment is much, much higher than the regular army.
So what sort of so just on that, because obviously you started off in the army, you did a few years in the army, you left the army, you went into the private sector, and you came back into the army with a particular aim to go into special forces and commando. So how does that training differ? Like, we all hear about it, but what does a normal soldier go through, and what does a special forces soldier go through?
So for example, I mean, I've gone back with and over the last few years trained the guys up, guys meaning guys and girls, trained up to certain units before they've been deployed to Afghan, and that's with a company called Kinetic Fighting, another commando mate of mine.
Paul Carr.
Paul Carr, you know Paul.
I know
He's
Paul,
a black belt as well.
Well, Paul, I've been doing.
You've been doing
the fight shows up in Brisbane for the army. I'm seeing that, and Paul's been running all that.
Yeah, so we've got a wealth of experience, Paul, and really good. He's implemented the whole Australian Army combatives program.
Or what I couldn't believe, and this blew my mind.
They've never really had one?
They'd never had one.
It's
this
crazy.
Blew me away. They never taught the armed forces how to fight.
They had this old system called the MSD, military self-defense system, and it was terrible. I mean, it was. I don't know whoever developed that, but you couldn't. They never ran courses. You could never get on one anyway. And I remember being in Darwin, and I was trying to go outside of work to go kickboxing and wrestling and do all these things and have some kickboxing fights, and you had to get permission to do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of, and some guys were turned down. Oh, we don't want to get hurt. Yeah, doing something. Mate, I was. It used to blow my mind that it was nothing.
Oh man, that just really blew me away when I got told that.
Yeah.
And Paul's been the man that's been initiating all this stuff into the armed forces, and obviously that's doing amazing things. But there's a lot, from what I understand, there's a lot of red tape to get through. I was told, and you might know a little bit more, but at one stage they did do a lot of boxing and things like that in the army. And I heard that around about a decade ago, someone actually died.
I'm not sure about that. But when I was in, 99, I got in at 99. Yeah. It just there wasn't
anything.
There wasn't anything. You couldn't do.
So what did you learn about close quarter combat?
In the regular army, nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. It was all weapons.
Yeah.
It was all your rifle. That was it.
You learn how to use a rifle.
Yeah, at basic training you had your.
So if you ran out of bullets, you're fucked.
Yeah, basically. But at basic training, you did your obstacle course and you did your. You'd have your bayonet attached and you would do your little butt stroke or thrust with your bayonet. But that's the only ever time I put a bayonet on my weapon was at basic training. Right?
Wow.
But in special operations, for example, we had the close quarter fighting course that we did, right? And that was Paul created that as well. So we did a little bit there, but there was no ongoing. It was like a 5-day course and there was nothing else ongoing. So we certainly did a little bit of it, but it was more as a team, which is what really realistically how you're going to be operating. So it was like 2-man takedowns and subduing the person and putting cuffs on them and things like that. So we did a little bit, and that's what I'm saying with special operations, the training is much, much better. Yeah. So a couple of things in regards to the normal army compared to what SF do. So we would just train so much more. So we would fire thousands of rounds every single week. All right. A battalion of infantry, their allocation of ammunition that they would get in a 6-month period, we would fire that in a week on the tactical assault group. So just by doing that all the time, you're in that training. You're in those scenarios. And then you do realistic scenario training where you do opposed training. So when the enemy has got simunition rounds as well, or at least you've got simunition rounds, because there's a bit of...
What are simunition rounds?
Simunition rounds like paintball rounds.
Okay.
Simunition is just the actual name of the company that produces these rounds, but there's other companies as well, but it's paintball rounds. Yep. And you can put them into... You have to change out your receiver and bolt or receiver group, but and barrel, but it's effectively you're firing your same weapon. Yep. So opposed training is there's a bit of conflicting information about how good that opposed training is good. It is because you can get sensory overload, especially if the enemy, in this scenario, gets a drop on you and smashes you with the simunition rounds. That can have an effect if you leave that scenario as a loser, and you've got to be careful, especially the leadership, to make sure that when you're doing those scenarios training that you always leave as a winner, no matter what. All right, so there's actually some people say that when you do your simunition training, the good guys should have the simunitions, but the bad guys shouldn't. So you're firing then, you're seeing your rounds hit that target or hit that enemy, and that enemy is going down. But they're not necessarily shooting at you, all right, because you don't want to get that sensory overload. But it would be almost like a progression. The other thing,
I would figure that at one stage though you need to build up to that, so you understand that you can get hit.
Yeah, but then you get people if they're not, I guess, experienced in it, they'll get hit with the simunition rounds and go, oh, I'm out. Yeah. And this is one of the differences as well with the normal army training, the normal army or the regular army up. The guys before they went overseas, we were doing simunition training, and I remember the enemy would get the drop on a good guy, fire a bunch of simunition rounds in him, and the guy would stop. And I remember one guy sat down. And I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I've been shot." I said, "Get the fuck up! You're not dead. Get up. Just because you're shot doesn't mean you're dead. You're not out of the fight." Yeah. All right. So that could be one, I guess, downfall of it when people think, "Oh, I've been hit. That's it. I can't fight." Whereas there's plenty of times when people in real combat scenarios have been shot and they keep firing. You wear it and keep going, especially if you've got plates or whatever, or you get hit with.
Plus the adrenaline's got to be
exactly right. I mean, and I know from personal experience, just because you've been shot, not that I've been shot, but I've seen people, or we've engaged enemy, try and put it, I guess, tactfully, we've engaged enemy and with a number of rounds, and that enemy has been hit
still going
multiple, and I'm talking like 10, 12 times, and they are still fighting.
Wow.
So this is the thing we've got to understand. Is just, especially with that opposed train, just because you're hit, you're not out of the game. But it also comes back to people that are running these scenarios. You've got to have your lessons learned, but you've got to set the scenario up where the good guys or the operator can test their limits and push them and learn, but win. That's the main thing about that. And you get a lot of lessons out of that opposed training.
Isn't that, I mean, I've never been hit by a bullet either, but I'm assuming that some people are going to get hit by a bullet and it's all over for them, you know what I mean? They're freaking out, you know, all sorts of stuff going on.
Yep.
Other people are going to get hit by a bullet, and depending on how they're mentally wired and programmed or what they've been trained, they're going to just go and just pick up the aggression, you know, and just be totally different.
It also depends on where you've been hit.
Yeah.
You know, there was a classic example of a Navy SEAL that burst into a room with four bad guys, and he got shot like 22 times. He killed them all and then walked to the extraction point a couple of k's away.
Wow.
Because he didn't get hit in any vital area.
No, yeah.
Whereas you could hit someone through the chin, take out the spine, that's it. Hit him in the heart, that's it.
Yeah.
You could hit him in the shoulder. One of our guys got hit in the shoulder, and it hit a nerve. Blew his nerve. He's fucked.
Yeah.
It's so painful that what are you going to do? Another guy that got hit in his weapon, and it sprayed all in his face. No major damage though, so he could keep fighting. So it just depends. It does depends on your mindset, probably how aggressive you are, but also what the scenario is. If you're in there fighting and you're engaged, you're probably more likely to keep doing that than maybe if you've been ambushed or you've been caught off guard.
And what made you, I mean, obviously you spent a lot of time in the army, and from the conversation we're having, you seem to have loved it. You had a good time. What made you get out of the army? Don't a lot of people go into the army, they're lifers, they're in there.
Yeah, I get that question all the time. It's interesting. I'd say most people aren't lifers.
Yeah.
There's not enough position in the army for everyone to be lifers anyway.
What do you do when you come out of the army? I mean, obviously you've gone into what you're doing with your training and all that sort of stuff, but or to answer that question, I suppose, why did you leave? What was the...
Yeah, I mean, my whole thing, the reason I went back into the army was just because I tried out for the Special Forces, tried out for the SAS when I was 22, didn't get through that. I mean, I picked up an injury, but at the end of the day, I didn't get through that. Got out of the army because the normal army was fucking boring.
Yeah.
You know, which is why a lot of guys go SF. They want to be more and they want to test themselves and they want to do more and they want to get more skill sets, and that's why they go that way. So when I got out, got the job in Iraq, which was awesome money and it was cruisy, but I just always had that. It was like unfinished business. Yeah. Like I wanted to know that if I had what it took, I just thought I was, I guess, tough enough at the end of the day. Yeah. Not to sound like a knob, but I just thought, well, I wanted to know, am I
tough that goes back. That's a boy thing as well, isn't it? That's a masculine. You want to know about this.
You want to know it, and you want to put. Well, not everyone doesn't. Not everyone wants to put themselves out there. Particularly people that do it once and fail. They've got that fear of failing again, and that's why when I teach guys, I talk about you've got to have that high pain tolerance, and I'm not meaning just physical pain. I mean emotional pain. Like if you try once and you don't get in, have you got the resilience to try again, right? Because I went again and failed, and I had to go a third time, and then that was unfinished business for me, and then I finally got in, and when I was in there from 2008 to 2013, it was almost like the golden years. It was trip. I went trained up, did the reinforcement cycle, finished that by 2008. Went on Christmas leave, basically came back, went overseas. So I'd only been in the unit really technically for 6 months, then I was overseas, did like 4.5 months over there, got back, had some leave, trained up to go on the tactical assault group, did the tactical assault group. Towards the end of that year, did my sniper's course. Following year, trained up to go overseas, went overseas as a sniper. So it was
just
fast action.
Stuff.
And then after that, I was like, what else? Because I didn't want to progress in the ranks, and I didn't really want to take on that responsibility because I probably would now, being a bit older, but back then I didn't want that responsibility. And those, I mean, I have to give it to the leaders in SF, particularly in 2 Commando, the corporals, the team commanders, the corporals that were running teams in an SF unit were fucking on the ball. Yep. They had to be on the ball, otherwise either they'd get the sack or people would get killed. But the shit that was going on in that environment that can be very overwhelming and crazy, and it goes back to their training too. You have to be intelligent just to get in it to SF, because you have to pass on the IQ test higher than I guess the General Army. So you already got people that are higher intelligence to get in there, and the training that they go through in regards to command and control and operating that environment and doing what you need to do with the teams and understanding the situational awareness, fucking brilliant. I mean, I used to step back as an operator, as a digger, as a private, and go, that's pretty full on. Like these guys know exactly what's going on.
And do they fuck with your head? Like, you know what I watched the other day? Hadn't seen it for years. I watched An Officer and a Gentleman. Have you ever seen that with Richard Gere?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, that's a classic old school movie. You've got to watch that. He goes into Navy pilot training, right?
Yeah.
But and I think Louis Gossett Jr., for those of you that might remember the movie, Louis Gossett Jr. was the drill sergeant. And he emotionally messes with their head, to try and make them mentally tougher. Does that happen? Do they push you to the point of like antagonizing you to make you tougher?
That's the selection. That's what the selection process is about.
Yeah.
It's about testing it that you have, the resolve to get through. So you and I guess if you tie it, and the intelligence part is a big point too, and referring back to this Colonel Grossman, he says that that's an indicator of how people are going to handle combat, and after the fact is their intelligence level, which is why the PTSD rate in special operations is lower, much lower than the regular army, because people, to get into special operations, you need to have a higher intelligence level.
Interesting.
So then you can process those emotions and those situations better and more efficiently, I suppose, than people of lower intelligence. And they found, there's plenty of studies they found that out, especially in Vietnam, signing up people that didn't make the grade, and the result of that. So yeah, you have to have a higher intelligence level just to get through. But the whole selection process is about putting you under the pump to see if you have what it takes, to see if you want it, to see if you can deal with it, and to see if you can operate and function in that environment. And you will, especially on selection, it's a mind fuck. You're not only being tested physically, you're being tested emotionally, you're being tested on your traits and attributes, which is different to your special operations traits and attributes, and if you have them, which is different to personality. Plenty of different personality types in SF. Everyone's just showed those traits. So
what do you mean by traits and attributes then?
Resolve, maturity, leadership, teamwork, integrity, that kind of thing. But it's basically being tough. It's basically being physically and mentally tough to push through any situation. And I know guys, you get your big alpha males, so you're like, okay, that's guy's tough. But one of my other mates, who's now a pilot, was a fucking World of Warcraft fiend. He would just play and I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, you're in special forces, and so the personalities and what they like and everything can be vastly different. Yeah. But he was such a good operator. Like, he was so fucking calm he was in my team, and he was so calm under pressure. I remember we were leaving one area one time, and this bullet came past, and I sort of jumped and looked back at him, and he just shrugged his shoulders like, what are you going to do?
Takes all time.
Mate, but people probably wouldn't think that dude is in special operations. Yeah. But yeah, you definitely get fucked with in the selection process. You get set up for failure to see how you respond. Your confidence takes a beating, and if you haven't got that belief in yourself, and you haven't got that growth mindset, and if you can't fail something and let it go, and think, what can I take from that? Now I need to put all my focus on the next activity, which starts right now. An hour later, if you can't do that, then you're failing another thing, then you're failing another thing, then you're off the course, or you get in this you're in this negative feedback loop where you think, oh, fuck that up. Now, if I fuck something else up, they probably won't select me, or they probably won't select me anyway. Oh, now I've just fucked something else up. So
you're messing with your own head.
You're messing with your own head. Yeah. Exactly right. So you need, in particularly that special operations environment, you need people to be able to, because the missions are so hard. No mission that I went on ever went 100%. None. I mean, I think it was the second or third job when I was in snipers, I was the lead scout for our team. We got flown in, Americans flew us in Chinooks, in the CH-47s, and you can't talk in the chopper, it's just too loud, right? and the team commander would be talking to the pilots. But once they landed, the rear door gunner, once he got out of the road, that's my cue to get out, right? Out the back. So they landed, he steps out of the road, I run out, and I'm like, fuck, the blades, because it was on a bit of an angle. I was like, shit, the blades are low. I'm trying to get on the blades. I run out at night, and then with my fucking pack that was like 70 kilos, take a knee, and the chopper, I could hear the chopper take off, and I'd just taken a knee. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. Like, how did everyone else get off? I turn around, and I'm the only cunt on the ground. Sorry, Suella. I'm the only person on the ground. I'm the only person on the ground, and then I was like, holy shit, what do I do from here? And you don't really train for that scenario.
So what happened? Where were they going?
Well, I was like,
what, you weren't meant to jump
I'm
out?
like jumping at shadows, going, what's that? What's that? And then you couldn't raise anyone on the radio because you couldn't speak to my team.
And it was night.
Yeah, it was night. Couldn't speak to him on the radio because he can't hear me.
Yeah.
And we were quite a ways, because we just had internal radios and it wouldn't reach back to our command, back to our base. So I just go, well, surely they're going to come back. And I was thinking of, because we had this, if anyone's watched Bravo or read Bravo 20, the book, they all have the silk maps. Like, we had silk maps. I'm like, oh shit, I got a RV to the theatre rendezvous, which was like, many, many kilometres down the track. I'm like, I better have to pull that thing out. But that's what was going through my head. The one that got away, Chris Ryan. For those who watched that book, read that book. But I just basically went into a bush and was wondering what I was going to do, and I figured they would come back, but you didn't know. I just didn't know what the issue was, and then it was probably felt like half an hour later, but it was probably like 8 minutes later. I could hear them. Because they went out of audio, the chopper. So I couldn't even hear them.
You must have been freaking out.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
It's like, shit.
I'm like, what am I supposed to do now? I had heaps of ammunition on the day, and a couple of grenades. And then eventually a couple of so I could hear the choppers, so I knew they were around somewhere. And then they came and landed maybe 200 metres down from where they first landed. Yeah. And then I walked down to them. I'm like, what the fuck? And they said to me, they thought, oh, we thought you'd been killed. We thought your head had been chopped off from the chopper blades. Wow. Because it looked like from where they were sitting that it was really low. And basically the pilot didn't like the landing area. Stupid, because I walked off everything was fine. Yeah. But so there was a bit of miscommunication.
Yeah, wow.
I suppose. But my point is that kind of thing happens all the time because... not that you want that to happen all the time, but just in that environment, because there's so many, I guess, moving parts. There's so many variables, including the enemy that doesn't do what you want them to do, and you've got your just where you operate in that environment in regards to the heat, or in Afghanistan it gets fucking cold. I mean, and the elevation, our ground level base was 1,500 metres, so it's already a little bit higher. So then doing some missions, you're looking at being dehydrated or getting affected by altitude, which happened on one of our missions. So there's all these things that you control what you can control, but there's a lot of things that go wrong. So we need guys that be able to process that and continue. If you hit a problem, go, okay, how can I get around that? How can I get to my end result? So a lot of SF is about problem solving and being able to deal with that.
You've got a couple, because you're a dad now. You've got a couple of kids. One's a boy. Yep. One's a girl. Would you encourage your boy to go into the army?
It's a. I would say yes, but he can't because he's got diabetes. Diabetes restricts you from a lot of things. Oh, not a lot of things. Some things. You can't go in the army with it. I probably wouldn't have gone in the army now. Like, you can't have. I got a shellfish allergy. Yeah. Like violently allergic to shellfish, and I've heard them turn people back now, which is I think that's a bit stupid. But you can. I probably wouldn't have got in, but I would encourage him to join. Yeah. I mean, I would say I would encourage him to go to for his ultimate goal to be SF, just because. If you want to do something, you want to be the best at it, right? Yeah. And I just don't think for people that have that real drive and want to reach their true potential, you're probably not going to get that beat down the regular army. But for a lot of people, they're not going to get that in the regular army, and that's why they want to go SF because of what you're going to learn, I say to guys that I put through my course that what you're going to learn on the selection course is you're going to learn so much about yourself that you're not going to know otherwise. So 99% of the population, I think, don't know what they can do because they don't put.
We're not tested enough.
You don't put yourself in this situation, and really, I guess why would you unless you're on a quest for personal development, right? Because there's nothing really like special operations, or like special operations selection. So not only are you getting put under the pump, you have to be physically fit and tough and resilient, and then you go through sleep deprivation, all that kind of stuff. But you're also going, do I have what you want? You know, you're being assessed the whole time, and you're not getting any feedback. So that's what fucks guys. Fucks with people a lot because you don't get any feedback, and really,
there's no one patting you on the back there, going, you're doing a great job,
or telling you that you might want to pick up your game there. Yeah. It's either nothing or you're a fuckwit.
What about the other guys in your team, or the other guys that are going through? Are they supportive, or is there a bit too much rivalry going on?
No, they're supportive, especially the longer you go in it. Yeah, the longer you go through it.
But the selection process, I'm assuming there wouldn't be, because everyone's trying out for a certain amount of positions.
No, because there's no certain amount of positions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the fact there's not enough guys will get through anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, so they would take actually with over in the SAS, they're pretty much full from what I'm hearing. So they don't need. It is more competitive. So even if you've passed the standards, they have a Special Forces entry test that they do before select to get on the actual selection course. So even if you just barely pass the standards on the entry test, you won't get a spot on selection. You have to pass them well. But being on selection, it doesn't take long to form that bond with the boys, and especially with your team. The teams will get rotated a little bit, but by the end of it, you're fucking good mates.
Is this the sort of stuff that you're teaching now? Like, you teaching the stuff that you learn in Special Forces, have you brought that out and teaching to your clients?
Yeah. So I guess I have two things. I've had a standard sort of mindset course that I've offered for civilians over the last 4 years, like people that don't want to join the army. Civilians,
do you still call normal people civilians?
You are civilians.
You'll never lose that, will you?
Yeah. No, well, I mean. No, not really. But yeah, anyone who doesn't, I guess, want to join the army. Yeah. You know, I think police call everyone else civilians. So, and emergency service, same kind of thing. It's anyone that I guess is not in that job that you're doing. But I've offered that course and it's going really well. But I had a lot of guys, and I didn't realise the market for it. I just was sort of promoting it to civilians because I guess it was easier. Not easy, it's just that they were the ones that wanted to sign up.
Well, people love this stuff, don't they?
People want to get mentally tough.
They love that tough mudder thing and all this sort of stuff where you push your boundaries.
People do want to test themselves, absolutely. And people get bored and people get stagnant. Yep. And I'll tell you about that in a sec, but I've gone through that as well. I've been guilty of that, being bored and getting stagnant, and you have to do something to break that cycle and start testing yourself again. But I didn't realise the market of guys that wanted to go for SF. And if I think about it now, when I wanted to go to SF, if there was somebody that offered some training and offered a course and offered some guidance, I would have been like, fuck yeah. Because I was, when you're not in SF, you're like, holy shit, that's big, that's up there. It's kind of on a pedestal. There's not a lot of talk about it. There's obviously cool books and movies about it, but it seems out of your reach. And then when you kind of do it, you realise it's not out of your reach. It's just that people aren't getting the right training.
So you're actually teaching guys that are already in the army that want to go to
Both.
SF, or guys that just want to try out for SF?
Both. So guys that haven't joined the army, there's what they call the direct recruiting scheme now, where you can go fast tracked into commandos, which is a good scheme, but it's very hard to get through because you're basically going from a civilian who knows
zero
nothing
to hero straight away.
Yeah, you're doing selection within the year. And the army, I always say again, it's something I say to guys, that the army just doesn't set guys up well for selection. Okay. Because there's whether they're in the police going for special operations, one of the police tactical groups, or whether it's guys in the army or that haven't joined the army that want to do selection, all they pretty much give you is a physical training program, and the physical training program is not that good anyway. It doesn't set people up for particularly the running component. And when I kind of broke selection down, and yes, I've taken a lot of what I did in SF, but a lot of stuff I've learned outside of that, because I didn't learn a lot of stuff in regards to mindset and mental toughness. It was like, if you go to a training, you can get to the end, mate, you're tough enough, you're ready to go. But there's a lot of things.
They didn't break that down for you.
They didn't know.
No.
They do now. There's more on, especially on the 2nd Commando Regiment reinforcement cycle. They do some resiliency training, some mental and emotional resiliency training, which is great. But they never did that when I did it, and they don't do it beforehand. And I think that we're missing the point. We're missing a step. We want to teach people not just who want to do selection, but the entire defence force, because that's your job is pretty full on, right? Especially if you go to war. I think we've worked that out. And they just don't teach them. There's no kind of course that they should do. So when I broke down the selection process, I was like, you look at this and you're like, everything's trainable. Everything on selection is trainable. It's just that we're not training guys up. They don't know. You know, if you don't know the tactics that we're using to fuck with you on selection, if you don't know how to improve your emotional intelligence, which I didn't know about at all, and that was probably one of my biggest failings going through selection, is that emotional intelligence.
That's probably one of most people's biggest failings, emotional intelligence.
I still have to work on it.
Yeah.
You know, when I'm trying to do something and
we all do.
My dog barks at something, I still get pissed off. I talk about it in my course. I still get pissed off at it.
Yeah.
But that having, like what I call it, I call it the BEST framework: beliefs, emotional intelligence, stress management, and time. So having the right belief system that you can, and this is for life in general, but I'll relate it back to selection. Having the right belief system and drawing from your past and believing that you can actually do it and setting the proper belief highway for moving forward. Having good emotional intelligence and actually not just saying it, the term EQ, actually knowing what the fuck it's about and how to improve it. Having good stress management strategies, because guys can train, and I was guilty of it. You could train and do a time in training, and I couldn't replicate that on the day. The same as when I'm doing jiu-jitsu comps. So it's so nervous, and a local jiu-jitsu comp is fuck all in the grand scheme of things, right? But I would be just as nervous as doing that as running off the chopper in Afghanistan, because stress is stress, right?
Stress is stress,
and you want to perform. But I didn't know that. But now that I know what I know in regards to having a routine and controlling your emotions and controlling stress and understanding what the body's going through, the last comps that I've had at jiu-jitsu, I'm so much more in control. I'm not gassed out. My forearms aren't blowing out. I can hear my coach.
Yeah.
I can. It's so much more.
Isn't that crazy? You went through all that stuff with Army and Special Forces, and you're still going to jiu-jitsu comp, and you're still
getting nervous.
You still get nervous, and you still feel the stress.
Same nervousness. That same dry mouth. That same not being able to eat. That same not being able to sleep properly. They're not the same stuff. But what I can do, what I know now, what I can do now in regards to performance and preparing for that, I wish I had known more of that. To a greater extent, and I wish the Army had taught me, because look at what we're expecting soldiers to do, and also after the fact as well, it's being able to not only ready them for combat or ready them to do their job, but after the fact to give them the tools to make sure that they're going to be okay, or setting them up for success after the fact. But that beliefs, emotional intelligence, stress management, and time is understanding the time factor, as in taking your opportunities right now, having the growth mindset, understanding that you can go back and do it again, understanding there's no better time than right now, or the best time was yesterday, next best time is now. That kind of, so I'll put that together in a package and teach guys and get them ready for that selection process, because I think we're missing out a lot of good guys in SF who just don't understand that, and it's almost like the Army's saying, well, if you don't have it already naturally, you don't have it. And for me, that is a real old school, fixed, stupid fucking mindset to have, because they give them a physical training program. If they wanted the raw element, the raw individual, you wouldn't give them a physical training program. But they're saying, oh, here's a bit of training, but not the rest of it.
You can train physical, you can train mental, you can train emotional. And I think not just in the Army, but population in general, we forget that we've got to train our mental, we've got to train our emotional. We forget that we've got to train all that. We concentrate on the physical so much, and I don't think there's enough effort put into training the mental and training the emotional intelligence. I think that's a massive thing.
It's all, like people say to me, selections is 90% mental. No, it's not 90% mental. It's like physical, mental, and emotional in equal parts. If you're not extremely fit and you're not training the right program, it doesn't matter how mentally tough you are, you won't get through. You know, if you're super mentally tough, but then you can't control your emotions and you get angry, even though you might get it done, but if you get really fucking pissed off, we don't want you in the team. You know, same as you could be, you know, have emotional intelligence down pat, but if you're not physically tough, you're not going to get through. So it's in all parts.
Yep.
And I firmly believe that physical training is, you need to start there if you're going to start somewhere. You can't just train the mental. You can't just train the emotional. You have to train all of it because they all overlap, and you're going to learn things that are going to complement the other elements by doing those.
This has been another episode of the Bold and the Beautiful podcast. Dave Ella has left the building.